I saw this app.
I got a hit.
In the new limited series, DTF St. Louis, Jason Bateman, David Harbour, and Linda Cardellini star as 3 suburbanites who spice up their love lives.
Wow.
Don't miss the new HBO original limited series, DTF St. Louis, Sundays at 9 on HBO Max.
Have you ever been listening to a creepy ghost story or haunting history and you're like, damn, this is so enjoyable, but I wish my friends were here so we could experience it together? That's us. We're your girls, and we'll bring the snacks when you join us on I Scream, You Scream, the podcast where we serve up chilling stories with a side of our favorite ice cream.
Every month, we pick a new flavor of ice cream and a new topic to go along with it. Werewolves, poison, cemeteries, you name it. From deep dives into stories we all thought we knew to your real-world experiences, at this ice cream party, we always get to the bottom of the bowl.
Cozy up with us every Tuesday for your weekly scoop of the most chilling histories, mysteries, and paranormal perplexities. Until then, keep it cool.
And keep it creepy.
Are you a fan of spine-chilling tales of the unexplained? If so, get ready for an exciting new podcast experience, Chillers and Thrillers. Immerse yourself in the world of the paranormal as I, your host, narrate true stories about people's hair-raising encounters with ghosts, demons, and other eerie phenomena. In Chillers and Thrillers, I'm dedicated to bringing you authentic, bone-chilling accounts without any comedic elements or skepticism. So dim the lights, leave your skepticism behind, and settle in comfortably for our bi-monthly episodes, available on your favorite podcast platforms.
Thanks for listening to the Red Treehouse, where I tell you scary stories to keep you up at night. You can listen to the Red Treehouse wherever you stream podcasts. Just be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. Oh, and leave a 5-star review. The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. In this episode of the Red Treehouse, I'm going to share a handful of true ghost stories taken from selected chapters in Harewood Carrington's book. What happens when we die? Are ghosts real? Do ghosts haunt houses? And if so, can they communicate with us and influence our world? I'll share the stories. You decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to the Red Treehouse.
LifeLock, how can I help?
The IRS said I filed my return,
But I haven't.
1 in 4 tax-paying Americans has paid the price of identity fraud.
What do I do?
My refund, though.
I'm freaking out.
Don't worry, I can fix this.
LifeLock fixes identity theft guaranteed and gets your money back with up to $3 million in coverage.
I'm so relieved.
No problem. I'll be with you every step of the way.
1 in 4 was a fraud-paying American. Not anymore. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
The Lincoln Spring Sales event is on now, and there's never been a better time to experience the feeling of driving a Lincoln. Pictures, sunlight through the available panoramic vista roof, music, weather, and maps on the 48-inch panoramic display, and a drive so smooth that inspiration rides up front. Stepping out better than you got in. That's the Lincoln feeling. Get behind the wheel of the 2026 Lincoln Nautilus SUV and discover exceptional offers only at your local Lincoln retailer.
It is claimed that ghosts have sometimes been photographed, though very rarely. In a number of cases, attempts have been made to photograph ghosts seen in haunted houses. But though the figures have been seen by all present, the photographic plate has failed to record any impression of the phantom. In other cases, on the contrary, definite impressions have been obtained. And though there is doubtless much fraud among professional mediums who claim to produce spirit photographs, there are many cases on record in which no professional medium was employed, and in which faces were certainly seen upon the developed plate. Experiments have also been made in photographing the body at the moment of death, to see if any impression could be made upon the plate, by the soul, in its passage from the body. And though many of these have proved negative, Dr. Baraduc of Paris has obtained a number of photographs which have never been explained. Again, numerous researches in the region of so-called thought photography have given some basis for the belief that thought may be, under certain circumstances, photographed, as for example in the experiments of Dr. Okorowitz and others. It may be said, therefore, that some progress is being made in this direction by psychic investigators, particularly by the French observers, who are far ahead of the rest of the world in these branches of psychic investigation, and that, with increased sensitiveness of film and plate, and greater perfection of lens and camera, it is to be hoped that the time is not far distant when it will be possible to photograph the unseen, just as we photograph living persons. There are ghosts, therefore, which are hallucinations, and there are ghosts which are genuine phantasms, the real article. It becomes a question in each instance of sifting the evidence, finding out which they are. Yet if there are real, objective, outstanding ghosts, how can we explain them? In what do they consist? In short, we are back to our original question: what are ghosts? Before we can answer this question satisfactorily, we must consider one or two preliminary questions. First of all, we must speak of the double, the astral or spiritual or etheric body, which resides in man, as well as his physical body. St. Paul constantly emphasized the fact that man has a material body and a spiritual body. This inner body is the exact shape of the physical body, its counterpart, its double. In life, under ordinary conditions, the two are inseparable. But at death, the severance takes place, and man continues to live on in this etheric envelope. This inner body has been studied very carefully by students of the occult, and a good deal is now known about it, its comings and goings, its composition, and the method of its departure at death. For our present purposes, however, it is enough to say that such a body exists, and that it is the vehicle man continues to use and manipulate after his death and his departure from this plane. It so happens that, under certain peculiar conditions, the inner body of man is capable of being detached or separated from the physical body. This usually occurs in trance, sleep, hypnotic and mesmeric states, or may be performed experimentally by some who have cultivated this power in themselves. When this body goes on such excursions, leaving the physical body practically dead, to all appearances, it may be seen by those in its immediate vicinity, just as a material body would be, if they are sufficiently sensitive or receptive. The following interesting case, recorded in Phantasms of the Living, Volume 1, pages 225 to 226, is a good example of the apparent traveling of the body to another place, and the perception of that body by a second person who happens to be there. Two individuals, at all events, shared in the experience, which is otherwise hard to account for. The case is recorded by the Reverend P.H. Newnham, and is as follows. Quote, "In March 1854, I was up at Oxford, keeping my last term in lodgings. I was subject to violent neuralgic headaches, which always culminated in sleep. One evening, about 8 p.m., I had an unusually violent one. When it became unendurable, about 9 p.m., I went into my bedroom and flung myself, without undressing, on the bed, and soon fell asleep. I then had a singularly clear and vivid dream. all the incidents of which are as clear in my memory as ever. I dreamed that I was stopping with the family of a lady who subsequently became my wife. All the younger ones had gone to bed, and I stopped chatting to the father and mother, standing up by the fireplace. Presently, I bade them good night, took my candle, and went off to bed. On arriving in the hall, I perceived that my fiancée had been detained downstairs, and was only then near the top of the staircase. I rushed upstairs, overtook her on the top step, and passed my 2 arms around her waist, under her arms, from behind. Although I was carrying my candle in the left hand, when I ran upstairs, this did not, in my dream, interfere with this gesture. On this I woke, and the clock in the house struck 10 almost immediately afterwards. So strong was the impression of the dream that I wrote a detailed account of it the next morning to my fiancée. Crossing my letter, not an answer to it, I received a letter from the lady in question. "Were you thinking about me very specially last night, just about 10 o'clock? For, as I was going upstairs to bed, I distinctly heard your footsteps on the stairs, and felt you put your arms around my waist." End quote. Mrs. Newnham wrote a confirmation of this account, which was also published. What happens at the moment of death? In all these cases, of course, the psychic body of the subject returns and reanimates the physical body. For if it did not do so, death would take place. When death does actually take place, this is what occurs. And psychics and clairvoyants assert that they are able to see and follow this process perfectly. And many of them have described exactly what takes place at the moment of death. The following description, for example, given by Andrew Jackson Davis, is taken from Death and the After, pages 15 and 16, and is as follows. Quote, "Suppose the person is now dying. It is to be a rapid death. The feet first grow cold. The clairvoyant sees over the head what may be called a magnetic halo, an ethereal emanation, in appearance golden, and throbbing as though conscious. The body is now cold up to the knees and elbows, and the emanation has ascended higher in the air. The legs are cold to the hips and the arms to the shoulders, and the emanation, though it has not risen higher in the room, is more expanded. The death coldness steals over the breast and round on either side, and the emanation has attained a higher position nearer the ceiling. The person has ceased to breathe, the pulse is still, and the emanation is elongated and fashioned in the outline of a human form. Beneath, it is connected with the brain. The head of the person is internally throbbing, a slow, deep throb, not painful, but like the beat of the sea. Hence the thinking faculties are rational, while nearly every part of the person is dead. Owing to the brain's momentum, I have seen a dying person, even at the last feeble pulse beat, rouse impulsively and rise up in bed to converse with a friend. But the next instant he is gone, his brain being the last to yield up the life principle. The golden emanation, which extends up midway to the ceiling, is connected to the brain by a very fine life thread. Now the body of the emanation ascends. Then appears something white and shining, like a human head. Next, in a very few moments, a faint outline of the face divine, then the fair neck and beautiful shoulders. Then in rapid succession, come all parts of the new body down to the feet. A bright, shining image, a little smaller than its physical body, but a perfect prototype or reproduction in all except its disfigurements. The fine life thread continues attached to the old brain. The next thing is the withdrawal of the electric principle. When this thread snaps, the spiritual body is free and prepared to accompany its guardians to the Summerland. Yes, there is a spiritual body. It is sown in dishonor and raised in brightness. It is doubtless this spiritual body which is the true cause of many apparitions, of many ghost stories. It is this body which is seen by the seer or percipient in many a ghost story. It is this body which moves objects and touches the individual who sees the ghost. This body is detached at death, as we have seen, and afterwards is free to rove at its own free will. Apparitions of the dead might thus be accounted for, while all those cases of apparitions of the dying which are with difficulty explained as due to pure telepathy might also thus find their explanation. The spiritual body, freed at that moment, would manifest its presence to the distant percipient as it did after death. So far so good. But how about apparitions of the living? How explain those cases in which the apparition of a living person has been seen, when the spiritual body is supposedly safely attached to the physical body? Many of them are doubtless cases of telepathy, but in those cases which seem to demand the presence of a body of some sort, we may suppose that the spiritual body may become detached, at times, under certain peculiar conditions, from the material body which it inhabits and animates, and can then manifest independently at a distance. The following cases are illustrative, apparently, of this fact, showing us that the etheric body can manifest on occasion at will, at a distance from the physical body. How the soul may leave the body. I put out the light and returned, but no sooner had I done this than I could feel a creeping sensation moving up my legs. I got up and lit the gas and went back to bed, with pillows arranged in such a way as to make me comfortable. In a comparatively short time, all circulation ceased in my legs, and they were as cold as those of the dead. The creeping sensation began in the lower part of the body, and that also became cold. There was no sensation of pain or even of physical discomfort. I would pinch my legs with my thumb and finger, and there was no feeling or no indication of blood whatever. I might as well have pinched a piece of rubber so far as the sensation produced was concerned. As the movement continued upward, all at once there came a flashing of lights in my eyes and a ringing in my ears, and it seemed for an instant as though I had become unconscious. When I came out of this state, I seemed to be walking in the air. No words can describe the exhilaration and freedom that I experienced. At no time in my life had my mind been so clear and so free. Just then, I thought of a friend who was more than 1,000 miles distant. Then I seemed to be traveling with great rapidity through the atmosphere about me. Everything was light, and yet it was not the light of the day or the sun, but I might say, a peculiar light of its own, such as I had never known. It could not have been a minute after that I thought of my friends, before I was conscious of standing in the room where the gas jets were turned up, and my friend was standing with his back toward me, but suddenly turning and seeing me said, "What in the world are you doing here? I thought you were in Florida." And he started to come toward me. While I heard the words distinctly, I was unable to answer. An instant later I was gone, and the consciousness of the memorable things that transpired that memorable night has never been forgotten. I seemed to leave the earth, and everything pertaining to it, and enter a condition of life of which it is absolutely impossible to give here any thought I had concerning it, because there was no correspondence to anything I had ever seen, or heard, or known of in any way. The wonder and the joy of it was unspeakable, and I can readily understand now what Paul meant when he said, "I knew a man, whether in the body or out of it I know not, who was caught up to the third heaven, and saw things which is not possible." In this latter experience there was neither consciousness of time nor of space. In fact, it can be described more as a consciousness of elastic feeling than anything else. It came to me after a time that I could stay there, if I so desired, but with that thought came also the consciousness of the friends on earth and the duties there required of me. The desire to stay was intense, but in my mind I clearly reasoned over it, whether I should gratify my desire or return to my work on earth. 4 times my thought and reason told me that my duties required me to return. But I was so dissatisfied with each conclusion that I finally said, "Now I will think and reason this matter out once more, and whatever conclusion I reach, I will abide by." I reached the same conclusion, and had not much more than reached it when I became conscious of being in a room and looking down on a body propped up in bed, which I recognized as my own. I cannot tell what strange feelings came over me. This body, to all intents and purposes, looked to be dead. There was no indication of life about it, and yet here I was apart from the body, with my mind perfectly clear and alert, and the consciousness of another body to which matter of any kind offered no resistance. After what might have been a minute or two, looking at the body, I began to try and control it, and in a very short time all sense of separation from the physical body ceased, and I was only conscious of a directed effort towards its use. After what seemed to be quite a long time, I was able to move, got up from the bed, dressed myself, and went down to breakfast. I may add that the friend referred to as having been seen by me that night was also distinctly conscious of my presence and made the exclamation mentioned. We both wrote the next day, relating the experience of the night, and the letters corroborating the incident crossed in the post. Such strange doings certainly tend to prove that the human spirit can leave its body and rove abroad, at times, and if this is the case, it shows us that our body is far more detachable than we usually suppose, and hence that it can probably continue to exist after the death of the physical body, when it is detached altogether. Once this is proved, all objection to the reality and existence of objective ghosts will have been done away with. We'll continue right after this quick ad break. The following are a collection of ghost stories. The Scratch on the Cheek. The case appeared in the Proceedings of the American, SPR, and the high character of the witnesses was vouched for by Dr. Hodgson and Professor Royce. It is to the following effect. January 11th, 1888. Sir, replying to your recently published request for actual occurrences of psychical phenomena, I respectfully submit the following remarkable occurrence to the consideration of your distinguished society, with the assurance that the event made a more powerful impression upon my mind than the combined incidents of my whole life. I was never in better health or possessed a clearer head and mind than at the time the incident occurred. In 1867, my only sister, a young lady of 18 years, died suddenly of cholera in St. Louis, Missouri. My attachment for her was very strong, and the blow a severe one to me. A year or so after her death, I became a commercial traveler, and it was in 1876, while on one of my western trips, that the event occurred. I had drummed the city of St. Joseph, Missouri, and had gone to my room at the Pacific House to send in my orders, which were unusually large ones, so that I was in a very happy frame of mind indeed. My thoughts, of course, were about these orders, knowing how pleased my house would be at my success. I had not been thinking of my late sister, or in any manner reflecting on the past. The hour was high noon, and the sun was shining cheerfully into my room. While busy smoking a cigar and writing out my orders, I suddenly became conscious that someone was sitting on my left, with one arm resting on the table. Quick as a flash, I turned, and distinctly saw the form of my dead sister, and for a brief second or two looked her squarely in the face. And so sure was I that it was she, that I sprang forward in delight, calling her by name, and as I did so, the apparition instantly vanished. Naturally, I was startled and dumbfounded, almost doubting my senses. But the cigar in my mouth and pen in hand, with the ink still moist on my letter, I satisfied myself I had not been dreaming and was still awake. I was near enough to touch her, had it been a physical possibility, and noted her features, expression, and details of dress. She appeared as if alive. Her eyes looked kindly and perfectly naturally into mine. Her skin was so perfectly lifelike that I could see the glow of moisture in the surface. And on the whole, there was no change in her appearance, otherwise than when alive. Now comes the most remarkable confirmation of my statement, which cannot be doubted by those who know what I state actually occurred. This visitation, or whatever you may call it, so impressed me that I took the next train home, and in the presence of my parents and others, I related what had occurred. My father, a man of rare good sense and very practical, was inclined to ridicule me, as he saw how earnestly I believed what I stated. But he too was amazed when later on I told them of a bright red line or scratch on the right-hand side of my sister's face, which I distinctly had seen. When I mentioned this, my mother rose trembling to her feet and nearly fainted away, and as soon as she had sufficiently recovered her self-possession, with tears streaming down her face, she exclaimed that I had indeed seen my sister, as no living mortal but herself was aware of that scratch, which she had actually made while doing some little act of kindness after my sister's death. She said she well remembered how pained she was to think she should have, unintentionally, marred the features of her dead daughter, and that unknown to all, she had carefully obliterated all traces of the slight scratch with the aid of powder, and that she had never mentioned it to a human being from that day to this. Yet I saw the scratch as bright as if just made. Confirmatory statements were obtained from the narrator's father and brother, his mother having died in the interval. The record of a haunted house. The case of a haunted house here given is very well authenticated, and corroborated by 6 written and signed statements, as well as that of the original informant. The account originally appeared in the Proceedings of the SPR Volume 8, pages 311 through 32, and is drawn up by Miss Morton, a lady of scientific training who resided for a long time in the house in question. She was well known to Mr. Myers, then Honorable Secretary of the Society. Very interesting experiments were conducted to test the nature of the ghost, as the following brief account will show. Quote, "My father took the house in March 1882, none of us having then heard of anything unusual about the house. We moved in towards the end of April, and it was not until the following June that I first saw the apparition. I had gone up to my room, but was not yet in bed, when I heard someone at the door and went to it, thinking it might be my mother. On opening the door, I saw no one. But on going a few steps along the passage, I saw the figure of a tall lady, dressed in black, standing at the head of the stairs. After a few moments, she descended the stairs, and I followed for a short distance, feeling curious what it could be. I had only a small piece of candle, and it suddenly burnt itself out, and being unable to see more, I went back to my room. On the night of August 2nd, the footsteps were heard by my 3 sisters and by the cook, all of whom slept on the top landing, also by my married sister, Mrs. K, who was sleeping on the floor below. They all said the next morning that they had heard them very plainly pass and repass their doors. These footsteps are very characteristic, and are not at all like those of any people in the house. They are soft and rather slow, though decided and even. My sisters would not go out on the landing after hearing them pass, but each time when I have gone out after hearing them, I have seen the figure there. On the evening of August 1st, we were sitting in the drawing room, with the gas lit but the shutters not shut, the light outside getting dusk. My brothers and a friend having just given up tennis, finding it too dark. My elder sister, Mrs. E, and myself both saw the figure on the balcony outside, looking in at the window. She stood there some minutes, then walked to the end and back again, after which she seemed to disappear. She soon after came into the drawing room when I saw her, but my sister did not. The apparitions were always of exactly the same type, seen in the same places by the same people, at varying intervals. The footsteps continued and were heard by several visitors and new servants, who had taken the places of those who had left, as well as by myself, 4 sisters and brothers, in all by about 20 people, many of them not having previously heard of the apparitions and sounds. Other sounds were also heard in addition, which seemed gradually to increase in intensity. They consisted in walking up and down on the second floor landing, of bumps against the doors of the bedrooms, and of the handles of the doors turning. The bumps against the doors were so marked as to terrify a new servant, who had heard nothing of the haunting, into the belief that burglars were breaking into her room. During the year, at Mr. Meyer's suggestion, I kept a photographic camera constantly ready to try to photograph the figure. But on the few occasions I was able to do so, I got no result. At night, usually only by candlelight, a long exposure would be necessary for so dark a figure, and this I could not obtain. I also tried to communicate with the figure, constantly speaking to it and asking it to make signs, if not able to speak, but with no result. I also tried especially to touch her, but did not succeed. On cornering her, as I did once or twice, she vanished. One night, my sister E went up to her room on the second story, but as she passed the room where my 2 sisters L and M were sleeping, they opened their door to say that they had heard noises, and also seen what they described as a flame of a candle, without candle or handle visible, cross the room diagonally from corner to corner. 2 of the maids opened the doors of their 2 bedrooms and said that they also heard noises. They all 5 stood at their doors with their lighted candles for some little time. They all heard steps walking up and down the landing between them, and as they passed they felt a sensation which they described as a cold wind, though their candles were not blown out. They saw nothing. The steps then descended the stairs, reascended, again descended, and did not return. The figure became much less substantial in its later appearances. Up to about 1886, it was so solid and lifelike that it was often mistaken for a real person. It gradually became less distinct. At all times, it intercepted the light. We have not been able to ascertain if it cast a shadow or not. I should mention that it has been seen through window glass, and that I myself wear glasses habitually, though none of the other percipients do so. The upper part of the figure always left a more distinct impression than the lower, but this may be partly due to the fact that one naturally looks at people's faces before their feet." End quote. Face slapped by a ghost. The following remarkable event occurred to a friend of mine, an elderly married lady whom I have known for some time. She is now making her home in Brooklyn, but at the time of her gruesome experience was residing in England. It is some years since this occurred, but the incident, she assured me, lives just as vividly in her mind as though it all happened yesterday. This is her story, just as she told it to me. Quote, "I was staying with some friends in the country. They had an old rambling house, with long drafty halls and corridors all over it. As the house was already full of guests, I had to sleep in a large room, at the end of the long passage, on the ground floor. The room in itself was comfortable enough, large and warm. Yet there was an atmosphere about that apartment which I did not quite like. In fact, the whole house made me feel creepy, for no reason that I can give. Bedtime came all too soon, and I took my candle and was shown to my room. My hostess saw that I had everything I needed, and then saying goodnight, went upstairs to bed. I had half undressed when I saw the door of my room gently and quietly open, as though a stealthy hand were softly pressing it open. I gazed transfixed, until when wide open, I could see that no one was, in reality, on the other side of the door. At that, I drew a breath of relief. A draft, I thought, coming down the hallway. It is nothing. And I chided myself on my fears, shut the door, and proceeded to undress. I had not gone far, however, when to my amazement the door opened again, just as quietly and stealthily as before. Again I closed the door and proceeded with my undressing. I had by this time finished and had donned my nightgown preparatory to getting into bed. At that moment, I was horrified to see my door open for the third time, just as it did before, slowly until it rested on its hinges, wide open to the hall. I now determined to investigate, so taking my candle in my hand, I stepped out into the hall and proceeded down towards the front door. I had not taken more than 3 or 4 steps, however, when the candle in my hands was extinguished, as though a breath of wind, coming from nowhere, had blown it out. I did not much relish this, as the matches were in my room, but I determined to keep on, in the dark, and see what the cause of this could be. So I kept on and on, down the dark hall, my left hand holding the extinguished candle, my right extended so that I could feel the solid masonry all the way down the corridor. I had proceeded perhaps halfway when a strange thing occurred. I suddenly felt myself slapped on the left cheek by something cold and moist and clammy. I put my hand up to my face and felt it was wet. For an instant I hesitated. Then I proceeded down the hall until I came to the front door. That I found closed and locked. Having thus explored the whole length of the hall and found nothing, I turned back to regain my room. Still holding the candle in my left hand, and still feeling the wall with my outstretched right hand, I crept cautiously along, not knowing what to expect. Again, I had proceeded about halfway down the hall when I felt the same cold, quick slap in the face, this time on the right cheek, and again I found it was wet. Thoroughly frightened now, I fled to my room as fast as my legs could carry me. Once within, I closed and secured the door by placing a chair against it. Next, finding my box of matches, I relighted my candle. Then I surveyed myself in the mirror to see what could be upon my face. Imagine my horror when, on looking in the glass, I discovered 2 long streaks of blood, one upon either cheek. I was so terror-struck that I gazed at myself for a few moments, unable to move or speak. Then I screamed, and after that I have no very clear recollection of what happened. I have a hazy recollection of anxious faces bending over me, of a low hum of voices, then oblivion. It took me many weeks to recover from the shock of that night." End quote. And finally, alone with a ghost in a church. The following case is sent me by a correspondent. I once knew a young man by the name of Charles D. Bradloff, who took a delight in ridiculing ghost stories, and whenever possible, in proving them to be due to fraud, trickery, or hallucination. He stated he was afraid of nothing. I said to him one day in conversation, "If you are as fearless as you say, would you be willing to spend a night alone, locked up in a church, with a corpse freshly placed in its coffin?" He replied that he would do it any time, so the test was shortly arranged. One of the parishioners had just died, and had been placed in the crypt of the church, with the lid of the coffin removed. The lights were all extinguished. We locked the doors after us and went away, leaving Bradloff and the spirits to fight it out between them. What occurred during the night must be told in Bradloff's own words, as nearly as I can recall them. Quote, "When I heard the key turn in the door that night, I confess that a strange feeling came over me for the first time in my life. I wanted to get out, but of course I knew it was useless. And in the next place, my pride forbade my leaving. Shaking off the superstitious fear that had settled upon me, I turned away and proceeded to explore as best I could the whole of the church. A bright moonlight fell in through the windows, casting queer shadows in various directions. And across the long rows of pews and the altar at the far end of the church, I walked about, looking at everything curiously, as it had been long since I found myself inside a church. Then I proceeded to the crypt, and walking boldly up to the coffin, I gazed long and earnestly at the corpse lying within it, as though to familiarize myself with it. I went on the principle that familiarity breeds contempt. When I had done this, I went back to the nave of the church, and finding a comfortable place, I lay down, and was soon in a state bordering on sleep. I should have been asleep probably very soon, but just as I was dropping off, I heard a faint sound coming from the direction of the crypt. It was like a deep sigh, and this was followed by other sounds which I find it hard to describe. All I know is that, in the quiet and stillness of that awful place, those sounds, slight as they were truly appalling, and chilled the very blood in my veins. Their very indistinctness added to the terror. I could not conceive what could make such uncanny noises. I sat up and strained my eyes in the darkness, trying to penetrate the gloom. Then I heard the first faint footsteps coming up the stairs from the crypt. At first, these were faint, but they became louder and louder, until finally I could hear them plainly. Undoubtedly, they were footfalls, as though a human being were mounting the steps from the crypt where the corpse had been laid. I rose from my seat, my hair standing on end, while queer cold shivers ran up and down my back. I advanced 1 or 2 paces towards the door, hardly knowing what to expect. Then as I looked, I saw step into the bright moonlight the corpse that a few moments before I had seen lying in the coffin downstairs. Frantic with fear, I rushed at the corpse, still shrouded, as it was, in the white wrappings which, torn and disheveled, still enveloped the body. I raised one hand as though to strike the ghost, and thrust the hateful thing from me, when I felt a stunning blow on the point of my jaw, and a moment later, I had lost sensibility. When I awoke, you were all round me. You know the rest." End quote. To make a long story short, it turned out that the supposed corpse was not really dead at all, but in a sort of trance, and had been buried prematurely. He had revived in the night, and was advancing into the church when he encountered Bradloff in the doorway. Thinking him a robber or an assassin, he had struck first, and being a powerful man and a good boxer, he had knocked out Bradloff by a blow on the jaw. When we arrived in the morning, we found Bradloff senseless, and the corpse, now stripped of his grave clothes, bending over him, dashing cold water in his face. What did you think of these terrific true ghost stories? Comment or email redtreehousepod@gmail.com. As we close this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're left with these lingering questions. What happens when we die? Are ghosts real? Do ghosts actually haunt houses? And if so, can they communicate with us and influence our world? I've shared the stories. Now you decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.